Hello friends, I am glad to see you again. Today I will tell you about a housing association that does not want me to live outside its jurisdiction. The first time I realized some folks think a clipboard gives them supernatural powers was the morning after my moving truck pulled away, when I got a letter claiming I owed fines for a lawn I no longer owned. The envelope had that officious look, block font, return address with a P.O. box, important, response required. I had driven all night to my new place, a quiet street with big trees and nosy blue jays, and I was still sitting on an upside-down laundry basket because my furniture hadn't caught up yet. I opened the letter and had to read it twice because my brain insisted it was a joke. The association said I'd accrued 36 violations over the previous 90 days, 36, for things like storing unregistered vehicles, the moving truck, improper trash receptacle placement, the bins my realtor rolled to the curb on pickup day, seasonal decorations out of date, a paper snowflake I left in a window for my niece, and, my personal favorite, failure to keep my lawn at a uniform height not to exceed 2 inches. The lawn had been dirt for a week because I'd reseeded before listing the house. 2 inches of uniform dirt? There was a final paragraph. Unless I paid within 10 days, the association would move to collect. There was a line in bold. We will not allow you to escape your obligations. That was the first time I laughed out loud, a sharp single bark that startled a jay off the porch railing. I had lived under that homeowners association for 5 years. When I bought the house, I was told the rules kept the neighborhood cohesive. The first year it was tolerable, light reminders about mailbox colors and when to put out holiday lights. Then the board changed hands and 2 people, an imperious woman named Margot, and a man whose first name was always paired with his favorite title, Parliamentarian Dale, ran meetings like authoritarian pep rallies. The rules started multiplying like rabbits. They emailed about leaf collection deadlines with countdown clocks. They measured fence slats. They made a teenager repaint a skateboard ramp because the shade of blue was discordant. By the end of the 5th year, I was selling. I did it as cleanly as a person could. I hired a real estate attorney named Len, who loved checklists more than oxygen. We pulled a resale certificate from the association, which is basically a legal report card showing what dues are current, what violations exist, and what capital projects are looming. The certificate is a big deal because it protects the buyer and seller from surprises. It's required in a lot of places. Ours said I was paid up with no violations, no liens, no pending enforcement actions. I also got the payoff letter from the association's management company showing my balance at exactly 0 the day we closed. I framed that letter for a week just to admire it. I moved. I was free, or so I thought. My new place was not in any kind of association. That was deliberate. When I was house hunting, I asked every agent the same question first. Do you see a maintenance shed with a stack of binders taller than a Labrador? They'd blink until they understood I meant, is there an HOA? If yes, I kept driving. I found a modest ranch-style house on a street where the neighbor across from me maintained a wild sculpture garden out of wind chimes and rusty bicycle wheels, and nobody seemed to mind. My favorite kind of rule, the kind that says, be a decent neighbor. Then the letter arrived. I called Len. He sounded personally offended, which I found comforting. You got the resale certificate? Framed. You got the zero balance payoff letter? In a plastic sleeve like a baseball card. So why are they sending you this? Never mind, I know why. Because some people like pressure more than they like facts. I don't live there anymore. He chuckled. That's your best defense. We drafted a response. It was crisp, like a good shirt. Len attached the resale certificate and the payoff letter and cited the law that said once a property is conveyed and accounts are satisfied, there's no magic rope that lets an association lasso you just because they feel like it. He sent it certified mail to the P.O. box and to the management company that handled their paperwork. We figured that would be the end of it. 2 weeks later, I got served. I was at my new job taking a break with a cup of terrible coffee when a man in a windbreaker and baseball cap walked up and asked my name with a tone that meant whatever I said next would be used against me. He handed me a stack of papers with a sticky note that said, "You've been served." The lawsuit was filed in small claims court. The association wanted fines, late fees, administrative assessments, and an injunction to secure ongoing compliance. My head did that slow tilt people do when they're trying to see a thing from a new angle. Ongoing compliance? With a neighborhood I could now only reach by highway and spite? Len read the filing and made a sound like a deflating balloon. They're bluffing with paperwork. Happens sometimes. People confuse persistence with authority. We filed our answer, included the documents again, and asked for dismissal with prejudice. Len said to show up to court with a folder and a calm face. Calm faces read well on judges. The morning of the hearing, I wore my "Don't Panic" tie. The courtroom was small, the kind with beige walls and a clock that said 10 minutes later than it really was. On the other side sat Margot, hair lacquered into a hurricane-proof shell, and parliamentarian Dale clutching a 3-ring binder. They had a new guy with them, too, a neighbor I barely knew named Troy, who once rang my doorbell to complain that my wind chimes offended his dog. Troy was now wearing a tie worthy of a weather anchor. They sat like a panel of judges, except we were the ones in front of the judge. The judge asked the association's side to go first. Margot stood and launched into a speech about community standards and the sanctity of uniform lawns. She referred to me as the defendant, like we were in a crime drama. Dale read from his binder about bylaws and infraction schedules. When the judge asked a question, they answered with paragraphs. It was the kind of performance that fills a room but doesn't move it. My turn. I kept it simple. I told the story with dates and documents. I explained the resale certificate, put the payoff letter on the table, and said, "I don't live there anymore." The judge picked up the letter and read it like it was a punchline. When he looked at Margot, I saw the expression Len had promised, the face of someone who realizes the law doesn't care about their emotions. The judge dismissed the case. You'd think that would be the end. It would have been the end if the story stopped at "they tried to collect and failed." But people like Margot and Dale don't stop the first time. They decided, this is the part that made my brain do cartwheels, that if they couldn't enforce their rules on me through their old association, they would create a new association where I now lived. They didn't live on my new street. They didn't even live in my town anymore. If you can call a place with a grocery store, 2 diners, and a park a town, they still thought a clipboard could cross county lines. The first sign was a flyer taped to my mailbox with painter's tape in that special shade of blue you see in community branding. The flyer announced an informational meeting about forming a neighborhood improvement council to protect property values on our street and sister streets. It didn't say HOA, but it used all the phrases that are synonyms for HOA when someone doesn't want the room to get hostile too soon. At the bottom were names: Margot spelled in bubble letters, Dale with parliamentarian emeritus, and, of all people, Troy, who now listed himself as community advocate. There was an address for a rented room in a local event hall. I stood there on the sidewalk staring at the flyer with a neighbor named Britta, who wore overalls and grew tomatoes like she was raising children. "What's an improvement council?" she asked. "It walks like a duck," I said. Our street wasn't fancy. It was a collection of houses that looked like they'd been built by people who wanted friendship with their roofs. A retired music teacher named Flo played accordion on her porch once a week, and nobody complained. The guy at the corner, everyone called him Sketch because he drew cartoons on catalog envelopes, arranged his recycling like a sculpture. What drew me here was the diversity of right answers. The idea that someone could show up with a binder and tell Flo to stop playing accordion made me see red spots. I decided to go to the meeting, not to disrupt anything, to understand, to plan if planning became necessary. The event hall had a carpet that looked like a magic eye picture. I sat in the back with Britta and Sketch and a man named True, yes, that was his name, who ran a home bakery and smelled faintly of cinnamon. There were about 30 people. At the front, Margot had a table with a tablecloth and a little sign that said, "Welcome." Dale had a gavel. He tapped it as if noise could make authority real. They did not waste time on subtlety. Within 15 minutes, Margot was explaining the need for a minimal governance framework to ensure compliance with agreed standards. And Dale was explaining how improvement councils could transition to binding associations with the consent of the neighborhood. They tossed around phrases: deed restrictions, architectural committees, special assessments. Troy handled the slideshow. Pictures of tidy cul-de-sacs, stock photos of smiling families, a graphic of a gold arrow trending upward because that's what property values do when people hold clipboards and stock photos. A hand shot up. "Flo, do you live here?" she asked. "We consider ourselves part of the broader community," Margot said. "But do you live on our street?" Flo pressed. "We have extensive experience," Dale said, which is a sentence that answers nothing and is proud of it. I stood. Britta put a hand on my elbow, a silent easy. I spoke in my calm face voice. "You tried to sue me," I said. The room rippled with murmurs. "You lost. That's already in the court record. Now you're here to create a new thing you can use to do the same thing. Except you don't even live on this street. I could feel my heart rate in my throat, but I kept my words slow. This seems, what's the tasteful term? Improper. There were some skeptical laughs. True leaned forward like a coach watching his team start to find its rhythm. Margot pasted on a neutral smile. We aren't here to discuss past misunderstandings. We're here to offer a service. Your neighborhood is lovely. We can keep it lovely. Without standards, entropy wins. Entropy also describes how fast my patience is evaporating, Sketch muttered, and a few people snorted. I wasn't alone. People asked questions. Who would be on this council? How would rules be created? Who would collect money? Could someone sell their house if they didn't want to join? Did the council intend to record anything against people's deeds? You could see the concept cracking under daylight. Dale tried to answer with jargon. He kept saying best practices like it was a spell. The more he spoke, the more my neighbors tucked in their chins and narrowed their eyes. Then Troy made a mistake. He said, look, the street is a little, quirky, which is fine, but standards could help us attract the right kind of buyer. That phrase, right kind of buyer, landed like a dropped plate. Flo stood again. If by right kind of buyer you mean someone who doesn't want to hear an accordion on a Tuesday, I suggest they shop somewhere else. The meeting ended with Margot promising to follow up with a proposal. On the way out, she stopped in front of me and said in a low voice that others could still hear, "You won't get away from us so easily." It was so absurd I laughed, which only made her angrier. That evening, my phone lit up. A new email from a brand new address. Neighborhood Improvement Council proposal. Action needed. The proposal was a PDF the size of a novella. It included a membership form and a schedule of dues. It included temporary rules that would become permanent upon ratification, a fine schedule for everything from unauthorized holiday lighting to unapproved exterior fixtures, whatever that meant. It also included an intent to file statement. Once a majority agreed, they'd record covenants on properties to make membership mandatory for everyone. Majority was defined as a percentage of the people who responded to the email. Not residents, not homeowners, people who responded to the email. They had invented a democratic process out of vapor. Len read the proposal and said, "This is ambitious. By ambitious, I mean laughable. But don't just laugh. Get organized." Getting organized is where I shine. I'm not the loudest person in a room, but I know how to arrange facts, how to find helpful people, how to build a binder that could survive a hurricane. So I turned my upside-down laundry basket into a desk by putting a door on it and started an incident book. First, I documented everything. The letter, the lawsuit, the dismissal, the meeting, the PDF, dates, times, emails. I saved copies of every flyer and screen captured every line of the proposal in case they updated it. I printed out the relevant law about forming associations and recorded covenants in places like ours, where there wasn't any developer plan for a master association. I made a spreadsheet with every house on our street and began knocking on doors. Door knocking is awkward until it's not. People want their lives to make sense. I said, a group that doesn't live here is trying to create a thing that would make you pay them money. If you don't say anything, they'll claim your silence is consent. Are you okay with that? 90% of people were not okay with that. A few were cautious, wanting to know if there were benefits like snow plowing. I explained that we already had municipal services for the streets and private responsibility for driveways. I had a line for the handful who wanted uniform lawns. You can have your lawn, your neighbor can have their tomatoes. That's freedom, not chaos. Most folks nodded. Flo baked me cookies for walking the block. Britta put a sign in her front yard that said, "Beware of improvement." Second, I found a lawyer who specialized in property covenants and neighborhood law, different from Len's general real estate practice. Her name was Adina, and she talked like an engineer. She mapped out how people could and could not create recorded restrictions. She explained how even if somehow a majority of owners agreed, and that was a big if, they'd have to record actual documents against each property, and anyone who didn't sign would be out of reach absent some original developer clauses none of us had. Without a developer or a prior framework, you can't just show up and staple obligations to random deeds because you want to clip coupons from people's lives. She also mentioned something I hadn't considered. If anyone tried to file fraudulent documents against my property, that would be a very specific kind of wrong with very specific consequences. Third, I started a neighbors group chat. We didn't call it a council, we called it Stoop. Every good neighborhood has a stoop where people trade news. We used it to share the proposal and answer questions. Adina joined one night to explain in plain language our rights not to be conscripted into an HOA by strangers with a printer. People who had been quiet at the meeting, like the couple with twins at the end of the street, found their voices in text. They were worried about assessments. They were worried about some future architectural committee telling them to remove the ramp they built for a grandparent. We reassured each other with links to actual government websites, not stock photos. The next week, Margot escalated. She and Dale mailed notice of intent letters to every house in a 7-street radius. The letters said they would hold a ratification vote 2 Saturdays from now and included a QR code to an online form. The form required you to enter your name and address and choose, "Yes, I support the Improvement Council," or "No, I do not support the Improvement Council." The kicker: the fine print said that by selecting yes, you authorized the group to structure the council as a binding association at its discretion and to record appropriate documents to enforce standards. The other kicker: the fine print also said that if a household did not respond, the vote counters would treat non-responses as yes votes. The logic made my teeth itch. We could have simply ignored it as self-parody. But Adina urged a different approach. Don't let them control the narrative. Fix the process in public. So we did something that felt both quaint and bold. We held a block party. Not a protest, not a counter meeting. A party with burgers and something called a squash casserole that garnered passionate debate. We strung lights across Britta's driveway and borrowed folding tables from True. Flo set up her accordion and took requests. I stood near the deviled eggs with a clipboard that said Stoop contact list. If Margot could weaponize clipboards, so could I. But ours had lemonade rings. Halfway through the evening, a man I didn't recognize walked up. He had the weary look of someone who had lived through a lot of board meetings. He stuck out his hand and said, "I'm Camden. I used to be on the finance committee of the association those folks ran before. I moved away last year." He nodded toward the end of the street, where Margot's small entourage had appeared, hovering like curious pigeons on the public sidewalk, taking pictures of our casserole autonomy. "You got out," I said. "I staged a jailbreak," he said, barely joking. "And then I watched people take turns being hurt. I thought I was done with all of it until I heard they were coming here. That's why I'm here. I brought something." He put a folder on the table between the pigs and blankets. Minutes, emails, budgets. All public record for that association. But the management company never posted half of it online. This is about a pattern. They learned they could make money from the friction they manufactured. I opened the folder. There were line items labeled Special Enforcement Program and Administrative Service Fees that looked like someone had set their calculator to greed. There were emails where an enforcement coordinator used phrases like, "We can increase compliance signals by deploying batch letters," like my original moving day fines, churned out by software to shake a tree and see what falls out. Camden had highlighted lines where they discussed delinquency as revenue opportunity. We didn't post any of it publicly that night because that wasn't the point of a party. But the folder took on a gravitational pull. People asked questions. Camden answered without gossip, just facts. By the time the sun dipped, we had a different mood on the street. Not just no thanks, but absolutely not. The next morning, my doorbell rang. It was a Saturday, early enough to be rude. I opened the door to find Margot and Dale and Troy holding clipboards like shields. Behind them lurked 2 people from the first meeting, both of whom had introduced themselves then with the kind of dry handshake that says, "I enjoy hearing my name repeated during roll call." Margot's tone was honeyed, but her eyes were field knives. "We wanted to offer you a chance to make amends. You've been spreading misinformation. You served me," I said, "in a court of law and lost. The record is public." I kept my voice even, calm faces. "Now you're trying to create a new entity to get around that, using a process that turns silence into consent. That's not misinformation. That's your QR code." Dale lifted his gavel. He brought it to my house and pointed at my doorframe like he was measuring something. "This trim color is not compliant with—" I held up a hand. "No." He blinked. "No, no," I said. "This is not your jurisdiction. You can't create a jurisdiction by declaring one in my doorway." "Everyone benefits from standards," Troy said as if reading from an index card. I decided to lay out cards they didn't know I had. The proposal's fine print says you'll treat non-responses as yes votes. That is not how consent works. The law doesn't let you record documents against deeds based on apathy. And if you try, you will personally be responsible for what follows, not some council. You, with names, on filings. Also, Camden says hi. I could tell from Margot's micro-flinch that she knew exactly who Camden was. Dale's knuckles tightened on his gavel. Troy stopped blinking. You need to be careful about defamation, Margot said. Great point, I said. That's why I'm sticking to documents. They left with a promise to see me at the ratification. As I closed the door, Flo texted me a photo of her porch sign, which now read, Accordion practice, 6 p.m., public meeting after. The day of their vote, they rented the event hall again and put signs at every corner. We didn't protest out front. We didn't yell. We did something better. We had our own room across the hall, reserved under the name Stoop. We had coffee and actual copies of the law. Adina came in jeans and a sweater, looking like someone who had just come from the library. Camden came with his folder. I put the resale certificate and the small claims dismissal in a clear sleeve like it was art. People arrived, curious, some of them after being turned off by the tone in the other room. We answered questions. We didn't call anyone a villain out loud. We just let the facts breathe. In their room, they had a ballot box like a middle school class president election. In ours, we had a clipboard where people could put their names under a statement that said, "We do not consent to any binding association and will contest any attempt to record documents against our properties. We will seek remedies if anyone attempts to do so." By lunch, our clipboard was full. At some point, Margot burst into our room with Dale and Troy flanking like stern bookends. "You're undermining a lawful process," she said. "Show us the law," Adina said without heat. "This is neighborhood self-determination," Dale declared. "I love self-determination," Britta said from the snack table. "I determined I didn't want you in charge of my pumpkins. We didn't win that day because we had more people. We won because we converted the default. They had wanted silence to count as yes, but now silence had become cautious people who promised to follow up. People who put their names on our clipboard explicitly saying no. They wanted to steamroll with a paper machine, but we made the road bumpy by laying down facts. After the event, they sent another email. It was written like a press release. "We are delighted to announce strong support." They included a percentage that didn't make mathematical sense given our street's number of houses. They claimed that a majority of respondents and non-respondents had affirmed their intent to pursue improvement. It was as if they were counting shadows as votes. Adina drafted a letter on behalf of the Stoop group. It said in crisp paragraphs that any attempt to record covenants or liens or any legal instrument purporting to bind our properties without our signatures would be challenged. It cited statutes. It was not angry. It was the kind of letter that makes the recipient print it out, put it on a table, and sigh. 2 days later, Camden texted me. "They're desperate," he wrote. He attached a photo of a social media post from a private group that someone had leaked. In the post, Dale had suggested targeted enforcement to encourage holdouts by citing nuisance laws about things like trash cans and grass height. They wanted to use the city like a bat. The problem for them was that our city officials weren't going to be their enforcement arm. They were used to real nuisances, not trash can visible for 19 minutes after pickup. I made an appointment with a city code officer named Becca, who met me with a smile that said I was the second person that day asking her to referee a neighbor spat. I presented the Stoop letter and the Improvement Council's emails. "We just want you to know what's brewing," I said. "If they flood you with complaints, please know it's a tactic. We are not anti-law. We are pro-reasonableness." Becca exhaled like someone who had been hoping for that exact sentence. "We've seen this before," she said. "We enforce real violations. We don't do drive-by drama. If someone calls because a neighbor's porch light is the wrong Kelvin, we will invite them to pay more attention to their own porch." On my way out, Becca pointed to a bulletin board where a flyer listed mediation services for neighbor disputes. "The city encourages talking," she said. "We love to see people use that before they weaponize us." Weaponizing was precisely what came next. The following Thursday, an inspector came to Flo's house because someone claimed her porch playing constituted excessive noise. The inspector had been to enough rock concerts to know an accordion at 6 in the evening was not a midnight subwoofer. He told Flo she was fine and left with a piece of lemon pound cake wrapped in foil. Later, a complaint came about Britta's wildflowers being invasive. The city's own landscaping guide praised wildflowers. The report was closed with a note that, if you read between the lines, said, "Please stop wasting our time." Margot and Dale needed a win, so they did the thing that broke whatever patience remained. They filed something at the county recorder's office. I didn't know about it until a letter arrived from my title insurance company of all places. because they monitor filings that might affect properties they've insured. The letter was terse. A document purporting to establish covenants has been recorded that references your parcel. They had attached a scan. It had a grand title, Declaration of Neighborhood Standards. It listed a general legal description of our area, and then had the worst phrase, "This document is intended to bind all properties within the described area." Intended. It felt like a threat wearing a blazer. I called Adina. She had already seen it, tipped off by another neighbor whose mortgage servicer had pinged them. It's not properly executed. It lacks necessary signatures. It's legally defective. But we can't just let it sit there. We're going to fix this. Fixing it involved what Adina called a quiet title-style action, plus a demand to the recorder to annotate the filing as disputed and non-binding. It also involved a complaint to the state office that oversees notaries, because the document's signature page had a notary seal that looked suspiciously like it had been applied to a blank page and photocopied onto many. Camden swore he recognized the notary's name from a friend of the board list. If that notary had acknowledged signatures not made in person, that was a problem for exactly the person who stamped the page. We filed fast. Speed isn't about being loud, it's about being first in line with the right forms. Our complaint was 40 pages of calm fury. It included my zero balance letter and small claims dismissal, and it included the Stoop list of neighbors who said no. It asked the court to declare the Declaration of Neighborhood Standards void and to order it struck, or at least flagged, so any title search would see, "This is not valid." It asked for fees. It asked for sanctions if the court thought this crossed from overreach into abuse. When the hearing was scheduled, word spread. The courtroom looked different this time. It wasn't just me and a binder. It was a row of my neighbors, quiet, well-dressed like they'd come from church. Flo wore a scarf with notes on it. Britta had a sprig of something green tucked behind her ear like a joke only she got. True brought cinnamon rolls for the hallway. Even Becca, the code officer, sat in the back on her lunch break. Not to testify, but to bear witness. The judge, different from the small claims judge, more robe, less clock, asked the Improvement Council's side to explain by what authority they thought they could record a document binding properties without the owner's signatures. Dale started with history. He mentioned ancient common law principles of neighbor agreements, like he had swallowed an encyclopedia. The judge leaned forward. "Do you have signatures?" Dale talked about the spirit of community. The judge tried again. "Do you have signatures?" Margot said, "We have support." The judge looked over his glasses. "Do you have signatures?" Troy cleared his throat like a car not starting. Adina stood and did what she does, connected dots with lines made of statute numbers. She handed up the resale certificate and the zero balance letter in Camden's folder as a supplemental exhibit to show a pattern. She didn't call anyone names. She let the facts line up like a polite firing squad. When the judge ruled, I heard a tremor in his voice, someone who'd seen this play before and was relieved to stop it in Act 2. He declared the bogus declaration void as to any property not expressly signed by the owner, ordered the recorder to annotate it as non-binding and index. Our complaint, so title searches would see truth before the lie, referred the notary issue to the state, awarded fees, and, bless him, set a sanctions hearing to decide whether filing it was frivolous or in bad faith. On the courthouse steps, a neighbor I barely knew shook my hand. "I moved here because the houses don't match," he said. "Thanks for keeping it that way." I told him it wasn't about chaos. It was about choice. "Exactly," he said, and disappeared into the afternoon with the kind of grin you get from a small, solid victory. Back on our street, the mood was celebratory but measured. People like Margot and Parliamentarian Dale don't disappear. They molt. You can't storm door every scheme, but you can fortify your own threshold and teach the block to check IDs. That evening, I dragged an old chair onto my porch. Flo's accordion floated. Britta watered her tomatoes. True walked a tray of cinnamon rolls like currency. Sketch sketched a boomerang gavel that looked dangerously accurate. My phone buzzed, an unknown number. "You think you're safe now?" I screenshotted it, dropped it in the incident book, and texted Adina. "People say things when their plan collapses," she replied. "Keep documenting, keep being boringly correct." So I was. When trash day shifted for a holiday, I posted the city link. When a streetlight flickered, I filed a ticket and shared the tracking number. There's power in showing how governance is supposed to work. Public, accountable, and not run by whoever owns the fattest binder. Then the corner house caught fire. A grill flare leapt to dry mulch. Smoke rolled under the soffit. We called 911. pulled hoses, counted heads. The firefighters vented the roof and knocked it down like surgeons. One kept frowning at the hydrant by Britta's yard. The valve was sticky. Maintenance had slipped. He promised the city would fix it. That night, Margot posted a little victory lap. If we had a functioning association, we'd ensure infrastructure maintenance. Nonsense. Hydrants are municipal. From our Stoop account, I wrote, "Calm. We notified the city, they're responsible, they're on it," and linked the page. True boosted with a picture of a firefighter holding a cinnamon roll. Soft power tastes like butter and sugar. 2 days later, the water crew replaced the valve and squealed the hydrant like a tea kettle. Becca from Code Enforcement texted a thumbs up. The Improvement Council page went curiously quiet. Next came a certified letter from a law firm claiming our statements encouraged lawlessness, that no Improvement Council signs were harassment, and demanding we remove signs, apologize, and hush. We didn't. Adina's reply read like a civics lesson. Public debate is protected speech. Signs within ordinance are lawful. Report any real harassment to authorities. Stop using threats to chill discussion. She attached the judge's order and CC'd the city attorney. My favorite line, the remedy for disagreement is better conversation, not manufactured authority. Soon, the notary board asked for records. We sent scans and dates. It wasn't vengeance. It was stewardship of the tools everyone relies on. While compiling exhibits, I found leverage in my old neighborhood's bylaws. Officers had to disclose vendor conflicts. Camden and I filed public records requests and found a consultant billing strategic compliance messaging, whose LLC address matched a name on Margot's letterhead. Maybe not illegal, but sticky enough to merit sunlight. I called a reporter, Inez, who writes about neighborhood politics with surgical humor. Her story was dry, sourced, and devastating. The court order, Becca stating the city would not be anyone's enforcement bat. Adina on consent and covenants, a sidebar on how to check your deed. It made their operation look exactly like it was. An attempt to monetize control by dressing it as care. A former volunteer left a shaking voicemail. "I'm sorry, we thought we were helping. It was about power." Dale later admitted online their insurer had abandoned them. Translation: no coverage for antics. At sanctions, the judge used egregious once like thunder, ordered fees, barred any recording without owner signatures, and required disclaimers that they were not a governing body and had no city authority. We shored up our immune system. Stoop formalized as a non-charter. We share information and help each other. No dues, no binding rules. Our process was simple. Knock first. Dogs bark? Recommend a trainer. Need a ramp? Bring lumber and a level. If the city drops a ball, we show up with inside voices. With Adina's help, we recorded the judge's order with our parcels, so any title search sees the vaccine before the virus. Life flowed back. A glossy postcard pitched a leaf and gavel listening session. Same people, new font. We went. I said, if a voluntary today becomes binding tomorrow, expect more sanctions. Weeks later, their website went under maintenance, a consultant quietly rebranded, and the state suspended the notary's commission for failing personal appearance rules. Neighbors 3 streets over sued for slander of title. The judge nudged settlement. The council paid and issued written apologies, promising not to file anything purporting to bind those properties. The city adopted a policy: no facility rentals to governing groups without proof of granted authority. The event hall followed suit. One afternoon, Troy knocked. No tie, just sourdough. He admitted he'd mistaken rules for people, showed me a warning from the Real Estate Commission, and said he was enrolling in mediation. I want to help people do it themselves. I believed him. Winter brought small courtesies. Shovel the bus stop cutout. Aim lights at roses, not bedrooms. Wave at the cruiser rolling by. A note tied to my knob read, "Thanks for the boring correctness." It worked. The state later warned consumers about HOA-like solicitations. Check your deed. Beware fake deadlines and non-response counts as yes. Never allow strangers to record against title. So no drum roll, just a soft chord at dusk. Flow playing, teens practicing ollies, True delivering cinnamon to the night shift, moths dancing in porch light that bothers nobody. People ask if I'm worried they'll try again. I point at the file labeled Void, the order recorded with our deeds, and the group chat that disagrees on paint colors but agrees on consent. The trick wasn't a taller fence. It was a habit stronger than letterhead. Big mistake trying to follow me. I'm the owner of my deed and my choices, and we're the neighbors who decided kindness plus paperwork beats clipboards plus threats every single time. Friends, thank you. See you soon.